On the previous podcast, we went over the four major causes of the French Revolution. We looked at the Old Order, how the Third Estate was heavily taxed, and yet they were the poorest group, and they resented the First and the Second Estate because they paid no taxes, and they were favored by the king. We also looked at weak leadership, how King Louis XVI did not want to make decisions. He turned away with the hardships facing the people of France and didn't dive in and try to fix the problems. His wife, Marie Antoinette, again, not a marriage by choice, but a political marriage. She's from Austria, and she's clueless about the conditions in France. She would rather spend money and enjoy her time in the palace of Versailles. We also looked at the economic conditions, how France was in a serious amount of debt, and the price of food is going up by, roughly speaking, 65%. The people begin to starve, and the people are getting very upset. When you see your child starve, drastic measures need to take place, and the people are ready to do something just to give the kids bread. And then we talked about the Enlightenment, a movement of philosophy, a way of thinking that said that people are good enough to rule themselves, and you don't need a king. So those were the four conditions that set the stage for the French Revolution. But these are just the conditions. We have yet to see a spark. Let me give you a campfire analogy to help us understand this. What you have in the campfire is you need kindling, you need dry wood, you need a place to set the fire up. However, these alone will not create the flame needed for the campfire. What you need is a spark or a match. I have set the stage for the conditions ready that make France ripe for a revolution. Now today I'm going to talk about the spark. I'm going to talk about the match that sets those conditions on fire. So we're going to be looking at this question right here. How do the people of France begin to challenge their king? And this is a challenge that turns violent very quickly. We're going to be looking at a couple terms. The terms I have in a pinkish color, and the first term we're going to be looking at in order to answer this question is the Estates General. Well, the king's realizing that he does not have enough money to pay off his debt, and he's been constantly going to everyone else, as we talked about on the last podcast. 50% of everyone else had to pay taxes with the money that they made. So this time he's like, you know what? Everyone else is so weak, they're starving, I can't tax them. So he goes to this second group, this very wealthy group, called the nobility. And he wants to tax the nobility. And the nobility had previously paid no taxes. And if you remember, it's a small group, but it's a wealthy group that makes up 2% of the population. However, the nobility was powerful because they were wealthy, and they were like, we are not going to pay any taxes. This is something we're just not going to do. So they call something a meeting, which is called the Estates General, and it's an assembly of representatives from all three estates. The nobility did this because they knew they could team up with the clergy in making sure the Third Estate had to pay these new taxes. Each estate's delegates would represent their estate, and each estate received one vote. So it would look much like this. Here's the Estates General. These are representatives that would meet at Versailles in order to vote on who would have to pay for these new taxes. So you have the First Estate, the clergy, right here. You have the Second Estate, the nobility, right here. And then you have the Third Estate, everyone else, right here. Well, what you see is in the Estates General, everyone gets one vote, one vote, one vote. Now, at first, this looks pretty fair because each estate gets one vote. What's wrong with that? Well, if you look at the population of each estate, you can see that it's not fair. Remember the populations. The First Estate made up 1%, the Second Estate made up 2%, and the Third Estate made up 97% of the population. Well, if you look at the populations, and it kind of can be shown here, the Third Estate has a lot more people, so they should have more than one vote. Well, what the Third Estate realizes, and they know this is going to happen, the First and the Second Estate are going to team up together, which makes two votes, and they're going to vote that the third estate are the ones that pay for these new taxes. Now, mind you, as I said, they already paying 50% of the taxes. That 50% of the money they make is taxed. So, and they're starving, and they're like, this is totally not fair at all. So the third estate sees the writing on the wall, and they're demanding that Louis XVI, the king, give the third estate more than one vote. And Louis XVI says, no, I'm going to keep it how it's been, how the Estates General has always been. Every estate gets one vote. And the third estate rises up and they say, we're done. We're done with you, king. This is our moment. This is the spark. This is where we're going to say no to the king, and we're going to form our own government. And the third estate begins to call themselves, and you need to know this, the National Assembly. And the National Assembly is basically the third estate, and they say, we are now the new government. We will represent the people of France. This king, this first and second estate, your power is done. And they meet in the Palace of Versailles. That's where the Estates General met in Versailles. And here you can see this picture where the third estate delegates all salute the idea of freedom and democracy. And they do it in a handball court called the tennis court oath. And at this oath they say, we will stay together. We will be an army of one. And we will not move. We will not disintegrate. We will stay strong until there is a new constitution. And in this new constitution, the king has to share the power with the people. So here's the spark where they're challenging the whole idea of an absolute monarchy. And what does the king say? Does the king accept this new constitution? This tennis court oath? No. The king, in fact, starts to send his army. This is his army. These are guns. And they start to surround the Palace of Versailles, where these delegates are meeting. And the third estate realizes the king is not going to back down too easily. And the people of Paris, Versailles was about 15 miles outside of Paris, and the Parisians, the people of Paris, received word of this, and the third estate members in Paris, which is pretty much everyone in Paris, they rise up and they say, if the king's going to get an army, we need to make an army. And they start to arm themselves with guns, but the problem is the people do not have their own army. They need gunpowder. And what better place to get gunpowder than the prison where many of the King Louis XVI guards are located. Here is the building. It's called Bastille. I'm going to just say Bastille because that's how it sounds. That's how it looks in English, the Bastille. And what you have here is the people rise up. They kill the guards protecting the Bastille, and what ends up happening is they take the gunpowder and they start arming themselves to go after the king's army. So they set the prisoners free too. So here's your first moment of violence where the people rise up. They conquer this Paris prison called Bastille. They kill the guards, they let the prisoners free, and they arm themselves. This marks the beginning of the French Revolution. It's July 14th, 1789. And people still in France celebrate it. It's like their July 4th, the Declaration of Independence for America. And fast forward it today, on July 14th, they celebrate the Bastille Day, when the people rose up and started to fight the king violently. By the way, the prison guards that they killed, they put them on spikes and paraded their heads around the streets of Paris. This is quickly becoming very violent, much more violent than what we saw in the American Revolutionary War. So we got a States General turns into the tennis court oath, where the National Assembly forms from the third estate. They say, we are the new government of France. The king says, no, you're not. The French people say, yes, we are, and we're going to arm ourselves and attack you. That's called Bastille. Well, the price of food is still up, and women are now getting involved, and you do not want to tangle with these women. Parisian women from France, just form sporadically. It's not planned. They have knives, they have pikes, they have you name it, and they march to Versailles. That's where the king and the queen live again, and they want a little attention from the king and the queen. So they march to Versailles, and they start to get very violent. The crowd atmosphere gets to them, and they break into Versailles, and they literally want to kill Marie Antoinette. This is Marie Antoinette's bedroom. She would have been killed by these women, but this door right here, she fled into this door and she escaped. Now, these women captured a lot of the guards, put the guards' head here, you can see here, put the guards' heads on pikes, and these women are not messing around, and they finally get a hold of the king and the queen surrounded by the guards, and they say, if the king and the queen do not go to Paris and are subjected to us, ruled by us basically, we will kill you. This is very violent. The king and the queen agree to move to Paris. It's the last time that they ever see Versailles, and women march to the Versailles. The main reason is because they need the price of bread to go down, and they demand the king to make that price of bread go down. So women are involved with the march to Versailles. And the last thing is the great fear that you need to know. This is also at the very beginning of the French Revolution. Again, things are starting to really turn violent. Here you see the Third Estate. The main group in the Third Estate, if you remember the last podcast, are the peasants. They make up about 80% of the population in France. Well, the peasants were basically controlled by the nobility. That was the Second Estate. And the nobility could go onto your farmland and just destroy your crops for any reason if you didn't pay rent. The nobility controlled the police, so the police were very corrupt. They would go after you. If the nobility didn't like you, you couldn't do anything about it. Well, this great fear spreads, and now it's a whole idea of power to the people. Who's the people? The Third Estate. So the Third Estate rises up against nobility. They rise up against the landowners, and here you see there's smoke, and the castles are on fire, and these are where the peasants rise up against the nobility and take the land for themselves. It's called the Great Fear because it spreads all over France. Here, this is in Versailles, mainly in Paris. This is in Paris. This is in Paris. The Estates General's meeting in Versailles, right outside of Paris. Again, I'm counting Versailles, Paris, because it's right in the same area. But here, this is important. The Great Fear is where it spreads outside of Paris, and it goes all throughout the country. The next podcast we'll look at, okay, so what happens when the people gain control and the king doesn't have the power? What is France going to look like? Is it going to look like America with freedom and democracy? We'll find